There's something I've been very conflicted about for the past couple years. I've always wanted to make a soundtrack ranking video for the Persona series, since the soundtrack rankings I did in the past were some of the most fun times I had making videos, yet the sheer amount of Persona music has always intimidated me. Ranking a game's soundtrack is far too daunting of a task, considering each game has so many songs, and ranking all the vocal themes would lead to a near impossible process of ranking some of my favorite video game songs ever. Since those options were out of the question, I needed to think of something else, something creative. I needed to think of music I could rank that didn't have an insane number of songs with varying levels of quality so I could actually rank them. Well, a couple months ago, the idea finally hit me. I need to turn to the Persona dancing games and the special remixes they made for each game. And that brings us to where I am now. I finally cooked up a list, and I'm happy to announce that the Persona music ranking I've long dreamed of is finally here. Before I dive in though, let me give a little bit of preamble. For those of you who may not know, the Persona series had 3 rhythm games, one for Persona 4, which released in the PS Vita in 2015, then one for Persona 3 and Persona 5 respectively, which released on the PS4 in 2018. These games all have varied song lists from the Persona games that they are based on. Some are the original songs pulled from the game's soundtrack, and some are special remixes that were created by various DJs and artists. Between the 3 dancing games, there were 44 remixes in total created, and that's what I'll be ranking here today. Atlus did have to go and make things somewhat complicated, however, as each game has additional songs that were released as downloadable content. Persona 3 and 5's dancing games reused songs from the original soundtrack, but Persona 4 dancing featured DLC songs with new remixes. I never bought any of this DLC, so I was hard to be certain that I accounted for all of the additional remixes, but I did add the ones that I could find in the ranking. One more note I'll add here, I am ranking these songs purely based on how well they are remixed. I'm going to do my best not to let my feelings toward the original songs change how I rank the remixes, and focus purely on whether or not they were remixed for the better. I'll do my best to describe my thoughts of the musicality of these remixes as much as I can, but given the fact that I don't have any professional music experience, I might get some terms wrong, so apologies for that in advance. These remixes prove to be challenging to describe a lot of the time, but I hope my points still come across. With that out of the way, let's get our dancing shoes on and dive right into the ranking. If anyone is knowledgeable about the full catalog of Persona dancing remixes, it should come as no surprise that this song is placing last. It's kinda hard to explain just how bad this song is. It just sounds completely unprofessional in almost every way. The instruments don't complement the song at all, and the piano that goes for the whole track gets annoying really fast due to the non-stop nature of it. There's also a clicking sound that shows up in the background that is in constant competition with the piano for most annoying sound in the song. It's mostly just those 2 sounds and the vocals that carry the song, so there's not even that much else to listen to. The one saving grace for this song is that it's an exclusive DLC song that doesn't even have a dance, so you don't have to listen to the song at all if you just play the base game like I did. If you haven't heard this remix before, I actually do recommend hearing it for yourself, purely because you might get a good laugh out of it. It really is bad to a comedic extent. I also recommend reading YouTube comments on any video of the song as well, those also gave me a good laugh. This is another one that shouldn't be surprising to see this low on the list, as I don't get the sense many people like this remix. I was actually tempted to put this in last place, but I do think the Shadow World remix is much less pleasing to listen to musically, but not by much. The beginning of the song is fine, it adds a guitar and a drum-driven style to the original Mass Destruction's intro, and it seems to work for the most part. Then the song takes a sharp dive directly off a cliff, as a section of really loud and obnoxious drumming and guitar kicks in. It seems to go way faster than the tempo of the original song, and it really feels like it overpowers Lotus Juice's rapping in a bad way. It'd be one thing if it was just obnoxious during the verse, but as the song goes on, you realize that the drumming does not stop. Even though there are really nice elements in the background that I like, the rock elements are way too distracting to be able to fully appreciate those parts. The worst part is, this isn't just a song for listening to, it's a song for a rhythm game, and there's just no good rhythm to follow here. The Shadow World remix is definitely a worse piece of music, but the fact that this remix is tied to a song as big as Mass Destruction just makes it as disappointing in my eyes. This song deserves something better, man. Okay, we've already made it out of the section of remixes I think are downright bad, so now we've hit the ones that I think are just okay. There's really nothing bad about this Whims of Fate remix, I just think it's a bit too boring for a dancing game. They made the remix more chill sounding than the original, which is pretty upbeat and energetic. I think an upbeat remix similar to the ones a lot of other songs got would have worked pretty well, but alas. Enough about what could have been, let's talk about the remix itself. The song is driven by a synth loop and other synth-like noise that kind of echoes a bit. Aside from being a bit boring, my main problems with this beat is that it really doesn't sound at all like Whims of Fate. None of the funky guitar from Whims of Fate carries over into the remix, which is the strongest part of the song in my opinion. There's also no beat drop or anything like that when you hit the chorus, which would have helped if it was there. All that together just makes for a bit of a disappointing remix for me. Not bad, just underwhelming. I'm not going to have much to say about this one, since there's really only one reason the song is so low. When comparing this remix to the original from Persona 4, you'll hear that there's really not much of a difference. The guitars sound a bit richer in the remix, but aside from that, barely anything has changed. I think a remix being similar to the original isn't necessarily a bad thing, but since this song is remixing an instrumental-only battle theme, I just feel like it needs a little something extra to spice it up for the dancing game. The original song also doesn't have the same vibe as the rest of Persona 4's soundtrack, so it feels like somewhat of an outlier compared to P4's other remixes. This is another song where I think the biggest crime is being too boring for a rhythm game. I do really love the original Heaven song because of how peaceful and melodic it sounds, but these just aren't the qualities I look for in one of these dancing remixes. It's kind of hard to fault the song itself, as it does sound beautiful with new drum sections and electric piano added to the song, with horns that kick in at the end. Though that came at the expense of removing some of the aspects of the original song that made it so catchy that I do miss when hearing this remix. The drumming is a solid addition, but sometimes it does seem to be fighting against the melody of the song in a way. Overall, it just doesn't bring as high of an energy as I expect when playing a rhythm game, even though it is quite a well-made piece of music. I feel similarly about this remix and the Whims of Fate remix, as I think the stranger and more chill direction this version takes isn't too fitting for a rhythm game song. Though, I actually do like this remix a good bit more than the one for Whims of Fate, as there's a couple parts that have the characteristics of the funkiest Persona 5 songs. The main section of the song puts an interesting filter over the guitar part, and adds in some fun synth sounds that complement the remix well. The song does some wild stuff with drums in the background too. I don't love all of it, but I appreciate the musical diversity it brings. This is another remix that I think I would like more if it was just a bit more upbeat. I also question the choice to use this song in the game in the first place, as even though it's not a bad song, it just doesn't feel like a song that should have made the rhythm game track list. Now, I do believe that this all stems from the fact that P5's dancing game released before any spin-offs were, so none of the songs from Royalist Strikers could be used. This is just a huge misstep in my opinion, but if I fully get into ranting about that, it might take a while. So I'll just say that it's songs like this that make me feel that there were other songs that should have been in the game instead. Not because this remix is bad, I just think we could have had something more interesting. I had a hard time deciding where to put this one, as I have some conflicting feelings. The majority of the original song is removed and replaced with this funky bass line, which is pretty much the driving factor of the whole remix. This means the remix essentially lives or dies based on how you feel about that bass part, and that's exactly where I'm conflicted. As I said earlier, I think the bass line is quite funky, but the repetitive nature of it can make it quite annoying as well. I do think the get up, it's time to get real part with the pitched vocals is quite catchy, and that's usually what I think of when I think of the song. The remix also features one of those anti-drops where the beat builds up like it's gonna drop but then strips back completely instead. I think this can work, but I've always felt a bit iffy when it gets used in music, this song being no exception of course. Overall, I just decided to put it on the lower end of the list, as most of the other remixes are far better in my eyes, but this one definitely has some great qualities to it. This is a song I had no memory of before starting to research for this video, as this is another DLC remix that is based on a Persona 4 The Animation song that had a small appearance in Persona 4 Golden. The remix itself is another one that's quite minor, as it sounds pretty similar to the original, though it does have all-around enhanced instrumentation which makes the song sound a lot nicer. I always think the remix sounds like a song you'd hear in a Wild West area of a video game based on the way the guitars sound, which is certainly a sound you don't hear often in Persona songs. Not too much else to say about this remix since it's so similar to the original, but I do think it sounds quite nice. This one is a remix I'm kinda bummed that I'm placing so low, as the original song is arguably the most iconic song in the whole Persona franchise. To me, this remix sounds a bit too much like a generic EDM remix that we all heard a bit too much of during the 2010s. This isn't too surprising given the fact that this song actually dates all the way back to 2013, as it was a bonus track on a Persona 4 soundtrack CD. I debated whether I would even add this song to the list, since it didn't originate from a dancing game, but I figured it'd be better to just rank it in case anyone was expecting to see it. But yeah, this one is a bit of an underwhelming remix for me. I do appreciate that it brings the high energy, but the individual parts of the song aren't really things that make for a strong and memorable remix. The song uses a lot of chopped vocals and wub-wub sounds that I think it could have done without, as the whole thing sounds a bit busy musically. I will say, I'm a big fan of the key change near the end of the song. I'm always an advocate for key changes, and I think it sounds quite nice. I know for a fact that my friend Mecha Dragon X will be very disappointed in me for placing this so low on the list, as I think this is his favorite Persona remix in the series. The song itself is quite good, but considering I'm ranking these based on how good of a remix they are, I think the remix itself is a bit disappointing. First off, it's awesome that we got some Persona 1 representation in these games, even if it is just reserved to a DLC song. But anyways, when I listened to both versions of the song, I actually found myself preferring the original version more. The remix opts for somewhat of a chiptune style sound in its music, which sounds fine, but I can't say it's my favorite. I personally prefer the original guitar sound, but I can see the appeal of the chiptune beat that was used instead, since it is such a popular sound for remixes these days. Chiptuneness aside, I think this is another remix that sounds pretty similar to the original song as well, since nothing drastic was done to shake up the song. The remixes still to come on this list do a better job of creating substantial differences, so I don't think I'll be complaining about the similarity much beyond this. Much like the Pursuing My True Self remix from earlier, this is another one I have conflicting feelings on. The main beat the song uses is quite catchy, though it's a bit strange that it seems to pull no musical elements from the original Signs of Love. The beat can be a bit repetitive, but I still do think it's pretty fun. Even though it sounds kind of out of place, it isn't really my problem with the song. The problem is that this remix does the weirdest stuff when it comes to using the original song's vocals. It chops them up and loops them in weird ways to the extent that it sounds like a parody of itself sometimes. It makes it hard to take the song seriously when you've got this odd vocal pattern that takes over the majority of the second half of the song. The beat sure is groovy, but this remix ends up being a bit too strange for my taste. I'm having a hard time thinking of exactly what to say about this one, as I know I'm not really a big fan of it, but when I try to think of why, I can't come up with many good reasons. I guess that it shows that we've hit the part of the list where the remixes start to get really good. First off, this is a remix by Shoji Meguro himself, which should be a recipe for success. I can hear that the song really takes a lot of what was used in P5's soundtrack and adds in parts that weren't in the original song. The remix consists of mostly a new drum track and a violin part that plays throughout the whole song. I've heard people say that the violin part reminds them a lot of Toxic by Britney Spears, and I can totally hear it. That aside, both parts sound fine, but I think they're a bit too crunchy and distorted, especially compared to the original. The bass song just sounds a lot cleaner in my opinion, and since the remix doesn't do much to elevate the intensity of the song, I think it just ends up being a bit forgettable. We've got another remix from a video game music legend here, as this remix is done by the funky uncle himself, Hideki Naganuma. When I first saw his name on the remix, I had high expectations since I know how people speak so highly of his work on other games, but this remix didn't end up being one of my favorites unfortunately. It's still quite catchy, but it also falls in the trap of being a bit generic and underwhelming. The first part of the song is probably my least favorite, as it uses a bunch of shorter synth sounds that kind of repeat up until the chorus. The chorus itself is quite good though, as the beat breaks into a much more interesting sound during that part, with additional sounds to accompany the original beat. I'm a big fan of how that part sounds, but it's not long until we return how it was before. We still got quite a funky remix for this one, but I think it still could have been funkier. I really have to applaud the song for making a pretty hype remix out of what is somewhat of an uninspiring track to base it off of. Now, I have no problems with the original Blooming Villain song, but I have to imagine it was a tough challenge to find a way to change the song and raise the energy to a level needed for the dancing game. The main changes of the song were speeding up the tempo and adding in a layer of heavier guitars. Both helped to really raise the energy, and a couple of the guitar riffs that were added before the chorus-like part of the song are really, really good. Ultimately, I still do feel a bit underwhelmed when it comes to this remix, as songs like this often don't make that big of an impression for me in the context of the Persona dancing games. It also still sounds quite similar to the original even with the extra energy added in, though I still might prefer this version over the original. This remix of Last Surprise is all about that funky new bass line, and, well, practically that's the only thing the remix brings to the table. Part of what makes Last Surprise so great is how complex the song is musically, and how it changes throughout the song. The remix is a lot more straightforward with its approach, as the main guitar riff practically plays throughout the whole song. Luckily, this guitar riff is really catchy, but it does get a bit tired at the end. The remix just ends up sounding a bit boring because of this. Nothing is really bad, but it's also not super captivating. The song adds some additional flair during the second verse and beyond, though those parts are pretty minor. In the end, it just comes out as being inferior to the original Last Surprise, and considering they made a second remix for the song that we'll talk about later, which I think is better, it ends up making this remix a bit forgettable in the end. Here's another remix that takes the approach of making a traditional club-style remix from its original song. The main thing to note about this one is that aside from the main lyric that gets repeated, it hardly sounds anything like the original Deep Breath, as Lotus Juice's rapping is removed and the beat is completely different. To be honest, I'm not super torn up about the big change, as I've never been a huge fan of the original song, but I can understand how it would be off-putting for fans of the original. The song is a typical build-up into a beat drop, which is always a fun thing to put in one of these remixes, though I do think the beat drop on this one is a little bit disappointing. It's a bit low energy for a beat drop, and the repeated parts of the same vocal segment get a bit annoying. I do prefer how the build-up sounds though, as it sounds pretty epic with good use of the original vocal. While I do think the remix is a bit too generic and annoying at times to be truly good, I do respect the big change that was made to the original song. I think songs with big changes can make for really interesting listens. This remix is actually quite similar to the Last Surprise remix I just talked about, in the way that it only subtly changes the original. Both remixes were done by the same artist, so I suppose that makes sense, but I still find it interesting that both are so similar conceptually. The remix uses a new drum beat to serve as the backing for the whole remix, which actually works quite well in raising the energy of the song. Most of the instruments from the original song are kept in as well, such as the violin, which ends up making the remix sound quite similar, but it also doesn't do anything to diminish the original. While this is quite a safe remix due to how things are changed, it's still quite a nice song to listen to. Cute is the word that comes to mind when I try to describe this remix. I'm not quite sure how to describe it beyond that, as this remix uses a really unique soundscape to change up the song. I found as I listen to these remixes that it's a lot harder to describe the music of these remixes compared to what I've ranked in the past, as those songs pretty much just use band instruments. Alas, I can't let that slow me down, so I'll do my best to describe this music regardless. The song is backed by some quicker synth sounds, but features a bunch of other fun noises like the one that kind of sounds like a steel drum, the instrument that people usually associate with tropical music. We also can hear some guitars in the background, along with the occasional change into a more computery sounding part. The remix feels like somewhat of a gimmick song with all these additions, which makes for a fun listen at first, but it got a bit less interesting the more I listened to it. It's a good remix, but we've still got better ones to come. This remix is really well done. I feel like it embodies the best parts of what make a great Persona remix, especially for Persona 4. Quite high praise for a song like 26, I know, but that's because the competition is only starting to get stiffer. All the remixes from this point and beyond are all songs I think really highly of, so keep that in mind as we get into this next part. The remix takes the classic piano melody from the original song and changes it into a synthesizer, which does a great job of keeping the song reminiscent of the original, but adding a danceable style. The remix also takes a line from the rap part and repeats it a bunch of times throughout the song. It can get annoying when other songs do this, but I think it works pretty well here. I think the main reason I don't feel super strongly about this remix is because it's still somewhat low-key and not quite as hype as the other remixes, but that aside, I still think this one is really impressive. Here's another remix that doesn't change too much from the original, but I think what it does change really adds a lot to the song. The sound of the song is shifted more towards a synth backing track, but it actually does sound a lot like the rock instruments that made up the original. In combination with a stronger drum track, it makes the whole song sound a lot crisper and fun than the original. After the first chorus, the song goes into an instrumental section that kind of sounds like a lot of random techno noises, but it's not quite as bad as some of the other breakdowns in these remixes. I do like the way that the remix transitions back to the normal beat after this part though, it's really satisfying. Despite keeping many aspects of the original song the same, this remix excels by making the original melody sound a lot better in my opinion, which makes for a fun listen every time. I'm not sure if Hatsune Miku being in a DLC song for Persona 4 Dancing is common knowledge or not, but I really hope that some of you are finding about this for the first time. I really wish I could put this remix up way higher to give Miku the respect she deserves, but unfortunately the remix isn't quite as impressive as I would have hoped. It's a pretty typical EDM remix of the original song, with a stronger drum track and a synth bass line. With those changes alone, it'd be a pretty forgettable remix, but luckily, we have the lovely voice of Hatsune Miku present in this remix as well. I do actually think her voice works quite well with the lyrics of Heaven, and it does go a long way of adding uniqueness to the remix. I do wish the instrumental side of the remix was a bit stronger, but the remix excels in the most important part, highlighting Miku and making a song that works well in her style. The original Shadow World is an interesting song for me, as I'm really not a huge fan of it. It does a great job of embodying the feel of Persona 4 Golden, but it's the only Persona intro song I never really feel like listening to. That was why I was so surprised when I found myself enjoying the remix so much as I listened to songs for this video, because I actually really vibed with it. On paper, it's not drastically different than the original, but the beat is more electronic-y and there's an effect placed on the vocals. But those small changes really make the song work for me. I think it's mostly the beat that I like, it's really catchy. Another small thing I noticed is that the harmonica part at the beginning got taken out. It's still there after the first chorus, but it makes a big difference not having that harmonica be the first thing you hear in that song. It feels petty to say that, but the less harmonica in the song, the better in my opinion. It's a good thing that they actually have a good remix for this song, because it would be tragic if the Beady Mouse remix was the only attention the song got. While I'm certainly more of a fan of the louder and more energetic remixes, it's quite nice to have a remix that's somewhat subdued and still really catchy. The soundscape used in this remix are quite interesting, as the remix uses a series of electronic noises unlike what you hear in the other remixes. When the beat drop hits after the chorus, it raises the energy a bit as some heavier synths get added in. It's a super satisfying beat drop, and one of the better ones I've heard from this list. Not too much else to say, but I do really appreciate how the song stands out from the others we've looked at so far. I always thought it was an interesting choice to remix this song, as not only is it from the spin-off game Persona 4 Arena, but it's originally a slow melodic credit song. The remix does a great job of taking the original song and making a fun remix that's on par with the other songs in the dancing games. The remix uses a new drum beat that gives the song a stronger flow, as well as another hype beat drop after the chorus. It does sound a bit generic, but it's not too noisy, and the lead up to the stretched out vocals part is really good. Not a song I expected to be in the game, but I'm quite impressed with what they did with this one. Much like the Time to Make History remix, the Heartful Cry remix does a great job of improving on the original song by refining the sound. The original Heartful Cry seems to have taken somewhat of a somber feeling to it, despite the guitar focus and rock sound. The remix takes everything that the original did and turns the energy up to 11, making the song into a danceable banger. The strong guitars in the chorus are a huge highlight. They sound awesome, and it makes me feel pumped every time. It's still not a radical difference compared to the original song, but the increase in energy does a lot for this remix. The instrumental songs aren't always my favorite, but this is certainly a strong one. It really shouldn't be that surprising that Last Surprise got 2 remixes, but I personally found it to be pretty redundant. Considering the fact that this remix is really good, it makes the existence of the one we heard earlier seem kind of pointless, especially since I thought it sounded too similar to the original. But that was a point of discussion for 11 spots ago. Let's highlight what makes this remix stand out. For one, I think this remix is a great fusion of the sounds of Persona 5 with a fun club song. It sounds pretty different from the original, as the instrumental is completely rebuilt, and it uses a number of interesting sounds. One part in the beginning kind of sounds like an acoustic guitar, that part is really cool. When the chorus hits, the remix hits us with a classic funky beat, but keeps the violins from the original song, which keeps it from sounding cliche. I'm not the biggest fan of the beat that goes with the verses, but the other parts of the remix are strong enough that it doesn't bug me too much. On paper, it almost seems like this remix would fall down with some of the others I said sounded generic or uninteresting, as it has that typical club remix sound to it, but there's something about this remix that I vibe with a lot more than the others like it. For one, I think it does a great job of creating variety, as there's a moment when the beat cuts out for a quieter moment before picking back up again, which is my favorite part of the song. There's also an auto-tune verse, which sounds pretty good, which is saying a lot. Those parts aside, I think this remix just brings a really fun energy to the song, with strong synths and bass throughout the song. Okay, I'm well aware that it's going to be quite controversial to have this song up so high. From what I can tell, people really don't like this one, and to be honest, I can see why, but I still find myself enjoying it a lot. I was actually going to have the song even higher, but as I thought about it, there's one aspect of the song that really brings it down that I'll have to talk about later. I first want to highlight why I like this remix so much, and it all has to do with the gradual build-up to the big beat drop. The song starts out simple and quiet, with only ambient S sounds and vocals at the start of the song. Then the song adds in synths, drums, and finally an epic violin sound as the song builds up to the chorus. The drop is one of the coolest ones seen in all of these remixes, and I feel like the build-up and the drop are both properly epic. That's really the main gimmick of the song, and I think it executes that part well. The part that really drags the song down is the auto-tune filter they decided to put on Lynn's vocals, which understandably has ruined the song for a lot of people. I didn't mind it at first, but it's a really strange effect in execution. It doesn't make the song better at all, and sometimes the filter just doubles in power at the end of the line, making her voice sound really bad. While it really is a confusing addition, I still don't feel like it ruins the song for me, as the drop still hits hard at the end regardless. I do think I made the right choice bumping it down a few spots though. One of the criteria that makes for a really great remix in my eyes is changing the sound of the original in a way that doesn't make it sound like you're listening to the same song without getting rid of the key aspects of the bass song. This remix is probably the best example of that so far, as the new electronic direction makes the song sound totally different. I'd even say it's a better remix of the Velvet Room theme than the actual Velvet Room remix discussed earlier, as the remix is much less noisy and sounds a lot more polished. The vocals that are usually associated with the Velvet Room are turned into smooth synthesizers, with the strong drum beat to tie it together. The piano at the start and end is a great touch as well. It's an epic way to open and close the song, and I think it would have sounded great in the original as well. This remix reminds me a lot of the Now I Know remix, as it takes a slower song and makes something a lot more upbeat out of it, though I do think this song does it much better. For one, it has a much richer sound selection, as the remix adds in guitars and drums alongside piano. The extra instruments make the song a lot catchier than it was before, as the song often gets stuck in my head after listening to it. Even with these changes, I don't think it's quite energetic enough to really feel like a song for a dancing game, but regardless, it's still an excellent track. I also have to highlight the guitar riff near the end. We don't get a lot of those in these remixes, and it's definitely one of the song's best moments. I feel like it's low-hanging fruit to call this song the Shido's Palace version of Memories with You, but every time I hear this remix, the first thing I can think of is how similar to that palace theme this remix is. Anyways, we have another appearance of a credit song here, with Shoji Meguro returning to deliver another remix. I mentioned this before, but I really am a huge fan of turning the melancholy credit song into a higher energy jam, as the contrast between the remix and the original is always fun to observe. The remix adds multiple instruments which really remind me of what you hear in some of the best Persona 5 songs, which is an absolute positive for me. The main melody that gets repeated is a bit overpowering, but it does do a great job of turning Memories of You into a song that hypes you up rather than makes you cry. Speaking of sad songs that were made into bangers, we have the remix of Futaba's Palace theme up next. This remix doesn't stray too far from the original's melody, but you can tell from the moment the song starts that this version is much more upbeat and danceable than the original. I might be a bit biased, as I already thought the original song was pretty catchy, but something about this version is really addicting. The remix uses faster drums throughout and swaps the guitar parts for a much jauntier sounding piano. Those changes, among others, really raise the energy of the song and make it a tune that's easy to dance to. Many of the instrumental remixes discussed earlier didn't do much for me, but songs like this show me that instrumentals can definitely make for great dancing tunes. This remix features some of the best instrumental improvements I've seen so far, as this song relies on the addition of drums, guitars, and brass to change up the song. A few of the songs created from Persona 3 Portable were remixed for Persona 3's dancing game, and I find that all of them created strong improvements over the original songs. The Portable songs are great, but they feel somewhat limited musically compared to the other Persona songs. Songs like this one benefit greatly from the remix, as the instruments really kick in and bring the energy. This remix uses a much stronger drum beat from the original, with many additional guitar parts added in during the verses, which make everything sound great. There's also an extended horn part past the first chorus, which has got to be my favorite part of the song. The use of these instrumentals over an abundance of synthesizer noises is really refreshing, and it really helps this remix stand out from the others. I'm really impressed with what this remix was able to accomplish, not only in how it was able to improve on the original, but also how it carved out its own identity as a great piece of music. Tokyo Daylight is a great song, but it's also quite a simple song, and it loops pretty fast and doesn't change much as it goes on. The remix addresses that problem incredibly, as this is one of the most rich and diverse remixes in the series that does a great job of evolving as it goes along. It starts off in somewhat familiar territory, as the remix uses a lot of the original vocal loop over a funky new beat. Then the vocals cut out for a bit as the song introduces some fun sounds in place of vocals. Then the song totally changes as a super cool synth solo takes over, before the beat cuts out into a part that sounds kinda ominous for a second. The song then goes quiet for a bit, then a flute version of the vocals bring the song back in a really satisfying transition. My words don't do this justice, but just know this is one of the most musically interesting remixes we've seen so far. Shout out to the composer who made this one. This was really well done. As we enter the top 10, you may notice there's a lot of Persona 3 songs that haven't made an appearance yet. Well, spoiler alert, there's going to be a lot of them in the top 10, as I found that Persona 3 Dancing contained by far my favorite soundtrack of the 3 dancing games. Speaking of, we have an incredible Burn My Dread remix here to kick off the top 10. This remix has a super interesting sound to it, unlike any of the other synth-heavy remixes in the series. Everybody knows the chorus part of Burn My Dread is awesome, but I've always been a bit iffy on the opening part. The remix turns that into a super hype electronic banger, with these really interesting male chopped vocal parts. The beat dies down for a bit before coming back to deliver an electric version of the chorus. It doesn't sound much different than the first part, but the energy is raised just enough that it makes for a super satisfying way to end the song. I really like the auto-tune effect used in the song. It works really well with the instrumental and it makes everything sound really cohesive. I initially thought it was pretty silly to have both the original and remix version of the song playable in Persona 3's dancing game, but I've come to really appreciate what each version brings to the table. I do think I prefer this remix to the original though, as I really like the sound of this version. It's certainly got a bit more energy than the original thanks to synths and piano added in the song. The song also adds in a new vocal part as well. I can't tell if it's sampling other vocal clips from the song or if it was an original made for this remix, but either way I really like it. Something about these new parts just make the song sound happier than the original, which is a really good aspect for a remix to embody. This is one of the catchiest tunes in the game, and it's one of those songs that just puts a smile on my face every time I hear it. Here's another song from Persona 3 Portable that was just totally improved upon with this remix. This version adds in a few electronic elements to the music and brings up the tempo with the drums, but it still sounds a lot like the original song in a good way. The remix parts aren't overpowering, so the lovely vocals still get to shine at the forefront of the song. Background parts are still really nice and interesting though. There's a lot of layers to hear if you focus on the instrumental. Near the end of the song, there's a really good part where the beat cuts out and we just get to hear the vocals alongside a new trumpet part before the beat kicks back in with a key change. It's a super strong way to end a great remix. I've given a lot of praise to the other remixes of credit songs for really upping the energy and transforming the original, but I found myself really loving this one even though it isn't the most energetic or transformative. This remix does change the original in a few ways, as the tempo seems to be raised and there's a large use of chopped vocals, but the remix isn't defined by powerful synths or banging drums. The synth work on the song is still really good though, as it adds a funky feel to the song in a new way. This allows the song to keep its somber feel while still somehow giving you a song that's easy to dance to. I have no idea how this remix can capture both vibes so well, but it all feels kind of magical. There's a part where the beat goes from quiet to loud near the end as Lyn sings a high note, which has got to be my favorite part of the song. This is a really great remix of a super special song. Much like Tokyo Daylight, Want to Be Close was always a favorite of mine despite it being a very simple and repetitive song. Luckily, the remix really changed up the song to be totally different in a way that sounds really good. The main part of the song uses an infectious bass riff that I found to be super catchy. It's reminiscent of the funky beat in the original song, even though the sound is totally unique. The remix also uses a lot of chopped vocals between verses, and I think they sound really good in the song as well. Once the part with the lyrics is done, the song changes into a more techno-sounding outro part, which I must say I don't love as much as the first part, but it's still pretty good. The main part of the song is so good, it really doesn't matter that I don't like the ending quite as much. Since Want to Be Close was a pretty simple song, there was always lots of room for creativity with a remix, so I'm glad this composer really decided to get weird and do something super funky. Of all the songs that I put higher on the list, this is the one remix I have the hardest time putting into words why I like it so much. The remix takes Best Friends, which is a song mostly made of rock elements, and turns it into a completely electronic techno banger. There's something about the bass drop and the electronic parts in the chorus that's super catchy and infectious. I don't even know how to describe it musically, but it's just pure candy for my ears. It sounds like other songs I've heard before, but this is easily the most I've ever enjoyed a song in this musical style. Not sure if this will be a popular choice in other people's top 5, but I know it's certainly in mine. Okay. One more credit song to talk about. I feel like a lot of those songs made it in the top part of my list, which does surprise me because it seems like it'd be more challenging to make a good rhythm game remix out of the slower songs, but almost all of them have been hits in my eyes. The reason why this remix is above all the rest is due to one thing in particular. The guitar work on this remix is absolutely heavenly. Not only does it take the hype level of the song up to a 10, it just sounds really nice alongside the vocals, and some of the riffs in the song are just spectacular. The vocals have plenty of time to shine over the guitars as well, so the added parts never feel too overpowering. As someone who likes a more energetic, guitar-driven song, it's great to hear the beautiful vocals of Brand New Days over a song that totally rocks. I don't think it's a controversial take to say that Lotus Juice does not miss when it comes to his contributions to the Persona series. I'm a massive fan of everything he added to the Persona 3 soundtrack and all the songs he's appeared on since then. This remix is no exception, of course, as it takes a song from the Persona 3 soundtrack that I wasn't a huge fan of and turns it into a certified Lotus Juice banger. The instrumental is still kept quite similar to the original song, and the female vocals are still there as well, though they're kept to the background and toned down a lot, which is a good thing in my eyes. As for the rapping parts that were added, I personally think this is some of the best rapping Lotus Juice has ever done. We only really get one rap verse, but it's an absolute killer, with both faster and slower raps that show his talent as a rapper. After that verse, the instrumental changes to a remix breakdown, which isn't quite as impressive, but then the song ends on a high note as Lotus Juice steps back in to sing the outro. All around, a great remix with some incredible rapping.
Down to the basement, replacement goes as placement. Big bucks payment, I dirty like a slave man. Began to lose patience.
And just like that, we've got back-to-back entries from Lotus Juice in the top 3. He must be doing something right. My praise for this remix is pretty similar to what I had to say for the last entry, as once again this remix mostly preserves the instrumental of the original song, but features multiple Lotus Juice raps added in. The remix keeps the chorus from the original song, but does add some extra synths to spice up the song. It's hard to say whether this song or Deep Mentality features better rapping, as there's really good stuff in both songs. I decided to put this one a spot ahead simply because we get more Lotus Juice bars in this one. I'm also a really big fan of the last part of the song. Something about the way the verse flows as the beat breaks down is really satisfying. This remix also doesn't feature any techno breakdowns at all, which I kinda prefer since it just lets you appreciate the pure goodness of Lotus Juice. I knew from the start that this was going to be number 1 on my list, because this song kind of blew my mind when I first heard it. The remix is a culmination of all the things that I've said I've loved about all the other remixes. Well, maybe except for the inclusion of Lotus Juice. This is another song from Persona 3 Portable, which, as I've mentioned, have benefited greatly from these remixes. The original song is great, but it does sound a bit plain. This remix is anything but plain, however, as there's many different instruments that have been added to enhance the instrumental. The 2 instruments that stand out most are the piano and the horns, as most manage to sound really cheery and bring a really bright vibe to the melody. The second verse changes up the instrumental as well, ending with a keyboard solo that sounds really great. The song is also sped up a bit, and maybe that's because I've gotten too used to hearing this version, but I think it sounds way better that way. The song ends on a super high note as the instruments all come together for a final chorus before fading out to just the piano melody. It sounds super cool in execution and creates a super satisfying finish. Even with all these instrumental flourishes, the song never gets to be too much, as is often the case with some of the louder remixes we've heard, where added noise can take over what made the original song so cool. It sounds like this was always the song was meant to be, and it just needed a remix from a dancing game to help it reach that point. Truly phenomenal. Well, that ended up being a much longer ranking than I thought it would be. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end. This has been a super fun video to put together. It's given me a much greater appreciation for a lot of these remixes that I might not have cared for before. I found this ranking to be a lot harder than some of the ones I did for the World Ends With You songs, as there was a much larger amount of songs that deserved a lot of praise. I'm sure those of you watching probably have much different opinions from me, so if you feel so inclined, I'd love to see people list their favorites of these remixes, or maybe even their top 5 in the comment section. As always, I love hearing from people who are as passionate about this stuff as I am, so feel free to put any thoughts in the comment section, even if they're negative. The creation of this video definitely got me in the mood to do another video in the Persona series. I'm not sure what that will look like, but I did have a small temptation to do a video ranking the entire Persona 3 soundtrack, even though it's so big. With Reload being out recently, it's just got me really excited about that music, so I have a lot of thoughts and it would be good to talk about it if people were interested. It would certainly be beefier than this video, so I'd only do that if that's something that interests people, so let me know if that sounds like an interesting idea. I'll happily make it even if 1 or 2 people sound excited for it. With that, I believe it's time to wrap this video up. Thank you once again for watching, leave a like if you enjoyed, and I hope I can return here with another video in the future. Until next time,